Alright, y'all, so today I want to make a very new and quick canceled video. Today I want to talk about a Ninja Turtle series that we could have gotten in the early 2000s that would have featured an entirely brand new early form of animation that, of course, I'm mentioning CGI slash motion capture animation. And it was a supposedly brand new approach. And the idea was basically to kickstart the Ninja Turtles franchise, which at this point had been in limbo, with a brand new series with this new animation and just kind of help bring back the Ninja Turtles. But ultimately, it was not to be. This version of the Ninja Turtles TV series was canceled. It was never picked up. And ultimately, the rest is history. We got to 2003 series, and, eventually, in a lot of ways, kind of in a spiritual form, this series and the idea of using CGI animation would continue with the 2012 series. But in this video, I want to kind of give you my thoughts on this proposed and canceled series. Kind of give you my thoughts on all the contents that are available with it, why it was canceled, and my ultimate thoughts and the legacy of it. So, regardless, let's get into this very interesting Ninja Turtles video. So first, of course, like all these kind of videos, I got to give you some background. The Turtle Mania, Ninja Turtles as an idea, as a property, was huge in the 80s and 90s, right? If you were a kid growing up during that time period, you knew who the Ninja Turtles were. In the 80s and 90s, TV series that propagated the toy line, the animated series, of course, ran for a staggering 10 seasons. But it was ultimately canceled because by the mid-90s, Turtle Mania was dead. Due to, probably in a lot of ways, the kids who grew up initially with Ninja Turtles naturally moving on to different things. And just in general, Turtle Mania kind of exhausted itself and died. I mean, the movies were over with, and of course, by the mid-90s, the series had died. And there was a long stretch of time where the Ninja Turtles kind of just remained in limbo. As far as I believe, there was still some occasional toys and comics made, but nothing in terms of a, forward-pushing series or, heck, even a movie in the works. I mean, there was ideas, but nothing really got off the ground. That is, of course, when the creators of the Ninja Turtles, Mirage Studios, decided to give it a go. But this time around, it was going to be different from the 80s and 90s series. For one, Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman. Peter Laird basically, as far as I know, took full control of the Ninja Turtles property from his co-founder. And basically around the early 2000s, especially in 2001, they started working and developing ideas for a new Ninja Turtle series. But this time around, Mirage Studios was going to be a lot more creatively involved, unlike the 80s and 90s series, where they are only not really involved and loosely attached. But Mirage was going to have a direct creative input into the series and a lot more to do with it. And they basically decided to start crafting ideas for a new Ninja Turtle series. They definitely wanted to make it a little bit more mature, more darker, definitely more in line with their comic books and the source material, but of course taking many elements and cues from what made the Ninja Turtles blow up in the first place, which was many elements from the 80s and 90s series. So they started crafting it, and eventually in 2001, in Mirage Studios in combination with Rainbow Studios. Now, to give you a little bit of background on Rainbow Studios, as far as I know, they are a game development studio that worked on ATV and sports games. They were eventually, later on in 2001, bought by Ubisoft, and I think they were dissolved as a company. But, like I said, to kind of get the general gist, they were mainly a game development company. Now, they teamed up with Mirage Studios for kind of a work period of basically 3 to 5 months to produce a sort of sizzle reel with Mirage Studios on what a CGI animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series could be. Now, CGI animation was very much in its infancy in the early 2000s. There was very few shows. Some shows were starting to use it. I think Reboot was like one of the very first ones, if not the first one. But like I said, basically on the look and how all this was supposed to appear, very much a early art form indeed. Now, they would use Rainbow Studios when developing this little pilot slash sizzle reel Would get some voice actors together, kind of make some new designs. They would also use motion capture for many of the movements of the turtles, especially during the action sequences, because they wanted to make it more fluid. Um, and eventually, the pilot, the sort of sizzle reel, was created. Now, I'm gonna get into this sizzle reel. It is online. You can see it. It was posted also on the Ninja Turtles website at the time, which this was created back in 2001. And like I said, according to the website and, people that actually were involved with making of this, as far as I know, they didn't have a, direct story or a proper plan for this series. They just wanted to kind of create a sort of sizzle reel of what they would have wanted to do with it and what they would have wanted to incorporate in it. But this was, like I said, this was just a test sizzle reel, not to mean, like, this is not to actually determine the final quality and the final storyline of the series if it ever got picked up. Now, to get into the little sizzle reel, it is online. The turtles themselves have very, kind of more closer looks to the comics, also feeling weirdly squished down. And there's a lot of uncanny valley vibes in this teaser, to say the least, when I was watching it. But they, like I said, they do still have the color headbands, and still feature a lot of really, personality traits that are similar to the turtles that we know mostly in pop culture. And they basically go through a various interactions and scenarios in the sizzle reel. Sometimes they're fighting like elite foot soldiers, and sometimes they're busting out with Donnie driving the battle shell or the turtle van. Casey Jones and Raph fight some foot soldiers on top of a moving trailer with a funny reference to Mirage Studios. What else? Like I said, all the other scenes where Donnie's fighting the foot. They also fight this kind of giant robot in the junkyard, all four of the turtles. They also meet the Triceratons, and they get their butts whooped. Leo kind of finds what looks like to be mousers in a sewer, which are very strange looking. They look more like spiders than anything else. There's also, you get to see Splinter in the little sizzle reel, and he whoops all of the turtles, gives a little bit of a lesson to them. We also see a brief scene of what this show's version of the Shredder, which would have been human and has a much more colorful look to his armor. And kind of, looks like a command base, maybe the Technodrome, kind of ordering the turtles to be destroyed. And that's kind of the basic gist of the sizzle reel. There's also other scenes that I forgot to mention, but that's kind of the general vibes. Not a consistent story theme, just a vibe, of what this show could have been like. There's also kind of other things like the running gags of Mikey saying cowabunga or turtle power, and Raph tells him to stop it. Kind of a funny jab at the 80s series, and this, like I said, this series attempt to distance itself a little bit from that, which they also, eventually would make it into the 2003 series. Now, beyond this little sizzle reel that was made, they also had some promotional character bios. These were basically things that were probably going to be shown to investors, to potential networks who would want to invest in this series and pick up the show. And just like I said, it's basically to give them more information. Also, probably showcases some new looks of the turtles. And I'm going to kind of go through them and give you my thoughts on them. So first, Leonardo. He's described, of course, as the leader. A little bit of a perfectionist as well. But of course, strives to do what's best for the team. And then we have Donatello. Donatello, similar to, of course, the 2003 series, is a computer genius. And is also described as basically wanting everything to be calm, and is also described as analytical. So, pretty interesting, I guess. Raphael is, of course, described as the hothead, not like the sarcastic Joker from the 80s series. So, like I said, similar to the 2003 series, but, pretty interesting. He also makes a few jokes and sort of jabs at Mikey, of course. You can kind of see the early relationship of what we would see in the 2003 series here. So, pretty interesting stuff. Mikey, of course, is the fun one, the prankster. He's also described as being a huge nerd. He loves books, PC gaming, TV, something that would also be in the 2003 series. Also, what's kind of interesting is mentioned he's a huge like reader of books. So maybe Mikey would have been a little bit more intelligent in this series. Who knows? Casey Jones has an interesting bio. Basically, has a vigilante. He's a vigilante in New York. Has a relationship and friendship with Raphael, similar to of course the final series. Has the very cringy line in the bio: "When New York went bad, Casey Jones got mad." I mean, I think that speaks for itself, right? There's also one for Shredder. Yeah, he's described as mainly as a terrorist. Like, he wants to take over the New York criminal underworld. He's like a martial arts genius and the leader of the Foot Clan. So, pretty cool stuff. And, of course, they go a little bit into the Foot Soldiers. Basically, like I said, they're a terrorist underworld organization. They come from Japan, and they have their sights on New York. So yeah, like I said, kind of little interesting bios and cards. You can also find it online if you want to do research for this series. But it looks like these were made to, like I said, give additional information on the characters and kind of possibly, intrigue networks a little bit more to pick up the series. Now, there wasn't really anything else, as far as I know, that was made publicly available about this series. No additional pieces of animation or behind-the-scenes stuff. But that's basically all the stuff for this Lost and Canceled 2001 CGI Ninja Turtles series. Now I'm going to get into why it was canceled and scrapped. Now, this is, like I said, a little bit unknown. We don't have exact sources. I don't think there was really too many people that spoke on this. But there was a post on an old Ninja Turtles website. I believe maybe it was Peter Laird talking about it. And basically mentioned that they created this sizzle reel. It was not an indication of the final story they would do. It was just kind of an idea of what they wanted to do with a Ninja Turtles show. And they figured, like I said, new CGI animation and motion capture would maybe help sell it. And it was shopped around multiple networks and potential investors around 2001. I believe probably in mid to late 2001. But eventually, all the networks did not pick it up, right? It was never picked up for series. It was never developed any further. And that basically was the sudden and quiet death of this lost CGI animated 2001 Ninja Turtle series. Now, in terms of what happened after the fact, they did try again to pitch a new Ninja Turtles series to Warner Brothers with a more 2D approach. For like I said, with similar designs to this pilot, but I'll probably make that into a separate video. But after this pitch, it would also fail, and eventually Fox, out of all people, right, the Fox box, later for kids, would actually order and pick up the series in 2002 from Mirage and a collaboration with another animation studio. We will, of course, get the 2003 series as a result. And other players in this, of course, like I mentioned, Rainbow Studios got bought by Ubisoft, I believe. So they just kind of went defunct anyway after the series wasn't picked up. And, of course, like I said, the 2003 series did happen. Now, I'm also going to kind of quickly go into many of the strange similarities this pilot from 2001 has. In a lot of ways, it feels like a very early version of the 2003 series. You can tell, like I say, you can totally tell Mirage picked up tons of ideas from this pilot and just basically put them in the 2003 series. Foot Elite Soldiers are here. The Foot kind of have a similar look to the final show. The turtles themselves look similar, even though I will say they look dramatically different and weirdly squished down. But they do look similar a little bit to the 2003 series. The Battle Shell, or the Turtle Van, looks very similar to the 2003 series. Splinter, in a lot of ways, does, even though I will say he looks more raggedy and weird looking in this pilot. The Triceratons look similar. I also totally forgot to mention April O'Neil also appeared in the sizzle reel. She actually admittedly looks radically different in this sizzle reel than the final show. She doesn't have the iconic red hair. She wears like a weird mechanic blue jumpsuit. Not horrible, and it looks like obviously she's played by a real actress because of motion capture. But kind of like I said, very strange elements to this. And it seems, like I said, this seems like a very early version of what would become the 2003 series. So it's kind of an interesting look of what could have been and maybe the kind of early development process for the original 2003 show. Now, to kind of give you my thoughts on the overall thing, if you will, the Lost and Canceled 2001 CGI animated series, I'm a bit mixed on it. On one hand, I could totally see many elements of this, looking very much like the 2003 series. Like I said, the humor seems very similar. The gags, the characters and their personalities. It seems on point to probably something I would have really liked if they expanded this. Which obviously in a lot of ways they already did with the future series. But at the same time, there's a lot of things about this, and I already mentioned this term earlier in the video. But the uncanny valley. CGI motion capture animation was very much in its infancy in 2001. It was an art form that didn't quite look right. And, unlike the eventual later kind of spiritual successor of this, which was the 2012 series, which that would use CGI animation, but the difference is they would do a stylized CGI animation. Characters didn't look, inherently realistic. They looked a bit cartoony. Their proportions are a little bit exaggerated. This series, I get the vibe that they were going for a little bit more realism, and especially with 2000 level CGI animation, I don't know how to feel about this, man. I think it would have actually, if they greenlight this, it might have aged worse looking back on it, right? I also think the turtles' designs and like some of their faces, in my opinion, like throughout the sizzle reel, I can already tell look downright creepy. There's some really creepy shots where the turtles are just driving, they're talking to other people, and you get that uncanny valley vibe from it. And it just looks a bit unsettling. I also think it's weird how they're so squished down looking throughout the sizzle. It just looks very strange. And I think in a lot of ways, it was good that you decided to, in a lot of ways, it was probably good, and maybe the network saw it too, that this animation, while unique, it's revolutionary, and there's definitely something here for a great Ninja Turtles series. You need to revamp your approach. Do something new, do something different, change your animation style. And that's ultimately what they did. I think it was probably for the best. Like I said, there's also a lot of weird, interesting things too about this series. Like Shredder would have been human at this version. Obviously, the twist that we got in the 2003 series was one of my favorite things about it. And I think that, him just being a normal Shredder, I also think would have taken away from it a little bit. I have no doubt that this definitely would have been a really cool revival of the Ninja Turtles. And like I said, there's already, I can tell, a lot of fantastic elements here. But, the untested CGI animation, the really creepy, uncanny valley vibes of it sometimes, and just in general, I would have also needed a little bit more of a story to go on to really give you a full-on, opinion on it. I think it was probably for the best that we eventually got the 2003 series instead of this one. But hey, it's a really cool and interesting diversion piece of turtle history. I would also love to see if it ever gets referenced in some kind of multiverse comic or something. And it's kind of just a cool look at the development of Ninja Turtles. And I think it was probably for the best, though, that this ultimately never got picked up and got canceled. But yeah, that's my quick thoughts on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles CGI pilot canceled series that never happened. If y'all see this video and you've ever heard of it, definitely let me know your thoughts on it down below. Hopefully y'all have a good day, and peace, y'all.